Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, we're picking up where we left off last time with Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. And if you remember, we're talking about Kitab Afatul Lisan, which is the chapter on the pitfalls of the tongue. And we've talked about 4 of those pitfalls, if I'm not mistaken. If you remember, the first one of those was meddling in affairs that you have no business talking about. And then we had argumentation or disputing or delving into falsehood, talking about sins, sitting with people of sin and being engaged in their conversations and the like. And we also talked about number 3, which was a ta'aqquru fil kalam, which was grandiloquence, basically like putting on a big show in how you speak, using words that are unfamiliar to people, manufacturing intelligence or, flexing a verbal muscle, if you will, when it's certainly unnecessary. We talked about that, and then we talked about music a little bit. We talked about indecency, obscenity, cursing, and the like. And now we're going to talk about what's counted as number 5 with the author here, al-muzah or al-mizah. Either one of those is correct pronunciation, and that means to joke, joking. So he begins and he says, the pitfalls of the tongue, of the pitfalls, the 5th pitfall is joking. And what's intended here is joking in abundance, being excessive in joking. And there's 2 ways a person can be excessive. And we'll find that the Prophet ﷺ, you may say, well, it appears there's some contradiction within the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because there are several hadith which he prohibits joking, and then there are other narrations in which he says, I joke, and which his companion said, you're playing with us or joking with us. So we're going to try to unpack that a little bit this evening and understand what is appropriate and what is, of course, prohibited. So one of those hadith which indicates a prohibition, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لا تماري أخاك ولا تمازحه ولا تعده موعدا فتخلفه. So this hadith found in Sunnah Tirmidhi, it says, do not dispute with your brother, do not joke with him. So that's what we're looking at in this particular hadith, and it ends with, and do not make a promise to him which you will break. So what's intended by this prohibited form of joking is excessive joking, and that is when a person makes joking like their calling card, if you will. Like they're always the comedian. And we'll talk about the pitfall of that shortly, but this is what it's talking about. When a person just jokes around all of the time. Or an excessive form of joking is off-color jokes. Off-color jokes meaning offensive jokes, where a person gets hurt through those jokes. And then, of course, other excesses would be like lying in order to entertain people. So the Prophet ﷺ, in another hadith, he said, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَتَكَلَّمُ بِالْكَلِمَةِ يُضْحِكُ بِهَا جُلَسَاءَ يَهْوِي بِهَا مِنْ أَبْعَدِ مِنَ الثُّرَيَّةِ. He says here in this hadith, you can find this in Sunan ibn Hibban. It says, a man will speak a word to make those with him laugh, and that word will plunge him further than a thuraya. Thuraya is a well-known constellation. It's a star. There's another narration that says, will plunge him further than a Sana'a. This is the well-known city. And another narration said, Sab'ina Kharifa, which is like 70 years, if you will. Basically meaning it will plunge you into the depths of hell a great distance. Simply by, trying to make people laugh. And while you're doing that, you're being excessive in either form that I mentioned to you, especially when it comes to inflicting harm upon somebody by way of that joke. So while the typical joke is not something that's hurtful, like the Prophet mentioned, do not dispute with your brother, like do not argue and dispute. That can be hurtful and harmful. Joking is typically not as harmful as disputing or arguing with your brother, but when it becomes excessive, an excessive form of playing, even though it may be permissible to joke at times, when it's excessive, it's considered a waste of time. So that's the connection between something that is in one scenario permissible, leading into something which is now mahdhur, right? It's something that you should be aware of, because now you're wasting time. You're wasting time when it's done too much. Also, another connection we can make is joking, of course, is going to result in laughter. And again, this is okay in small doses, but excessive laughter kills the heart, as was noted by the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was reported, this is from Imam Bukhari in Al-Adab Mufrad, he says, لا تكثروا الضحك. Do not laugh in abundance. فإن كثرة الضحك تميت القلب. Too much laughter will kill the heart. Too much laughter will kill the heart. So the laughter bit is not what kills the heart. It's too much of it which kills the heart. And what is meant by killing the heart here is that the heart will become covered with heedlessness from the remembrance of Allah. So if it's in excessive, then you're constantly being entertained, and either you're the joker, or you're the one that's the recipient and the one being entertained. If that's a regular pastime and it's continuous and constant, then you're busy laughing and being entertained, as opposed to filling your heart with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's one element of it there. Wasting time, laughing in excess, etc. The Imam also mentions that laughter at times results, or I should say joking at times results in ill will, meaning the ill will of others. And this was mentioned by one of the greats, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And he said, fear Allah and beware of joking, for it will result in ill will and lead to that which is loathsome. And so these are like the off-colored jokes that can offend somebody, or annoying other people with constant jokes, and people become turned off by that, and it leads to this type of ill will or dislike between people. So that's one of the other results. The last thing that he mentions here is that it can lead to a loss of respect for a person that jokes excessively. Umar radiallahu anhu, he said that whoever laughs a lot loses respect. Whoever jokes is taken lightly. Whoever does something a lot becomes known for that thing. So, as I mentioned before, I alluded to this, is you become known as the comedian. He's always joking. There's nothing serious about him. You can't take anything he says seriously, because all he's trying to do is get a laugh. And so that's what you become, kind of like the comedian or the court jester or the joker. And then he went on in this narration. He says, whoever speaks a lot will make many mistakes, and whoever makes many mistakes loses their shyness. And whoever loses their shyness, is his hayat, will lose their fear. And we're talking about the reverential fear of Allah. And whoever loses their fear, their heart will die. Laughter indicates heedlessness of the hereafter. Too much of it, of course. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ مَا أَعْلَمُ لَبَكَيْتُمْ كَثِيرًا وَلَضَحِكْتُمْ قَلِيلًا. This is found in Sahih Bukhari. If you knew what I know, you would cry a lot and laugh very little. And it's said that this particular narration was, he said this, the Prophet ﷺ, while delivering a sermon on the occasion of an eclipse. And so the eclipse, of course, whether it's a solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, we've talked about that in some detail, the legal aspects of that, and the prayer that's performed, it's done as a reminder of Allah's magnificence and greatness and His power, and it is a prayer that is done out of fear, reverential fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what the Prophet ﷺ is saying in this context is that if you knew of Allah's punishment for the sinners and the horrors of the resurrection, if you knew of what I know regarding those things, then you would never laugh. Even though he says, لَضَحِكْتُمْ قَلِيلًا, you would laugh very little. In the context of this, it means you wouldn't laugh at all. The context of that situation. And based on some of the structure of the language here, it means that you would never laugh. So that gives you a little bit of insight into why the scholars of Islam have derived laughter as being from the pitfalls of the tongue. So that's right after al-mizah. He says, أَمَّا الْيَسِيرُ مِنْهُ, as far as a little bit, فَلَا يُنْهَى عَنْهُ, it's not prohibited. إِذَا كَانَ صِدْقًا, as long as it's truthful, as long as the joke is truthful and not a fabrication. Right? So even the Muslim is honest even when they're joking. And we're going to look at some examples when the Prophet ﷺ would joke with his companions and see how even his jokes were truthful. And he noted that himself. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he says, كَانَ يَمْزَحُ وَلَا يَقُولُ إِلَّا حَقًّا. So this is what he notes, that he would joke around and it would only be truthful words. And the Prophet ﷺ said this himself. You find this in Sunnah Tirmidhi. He says, إِنِّي لَأَمْزَحُ وَلَا أَقُولُ إِلَّا حَقًّا. He says, indeed, certainly I joke. But I only speak the truth. And his companions says, إِنَّكَ تُدَاعِبُنَا. They said, you are playing with us or joking around with us. Ya Rasulullah. He says, إِنِّي لَا أَقُولُ إِلَّا حَقًّا. But I only speak the truth. So oftentimes you find that most of the jokes that people say are fabrications. And more often than not, the people that are professional entertainers and comedians, the things that they say are all fabrications. They're stories, and they're tales in order to get you to laugh. So here, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, even when you're going to try and entertain somebody or make light of a situation or try and there is a method, there is a goal to this, by the way, we'll look at shortly. You have to be truthful in that, such that you don't, you're not going to compromise your own dignity and standing within your community. Okay, so this is found in Sunnah Tirmidhi. So the Prophet ﷺ would joke, there's no doubt about it. It's mentioned here, he himself admitted to that, and there are examples that we can look out throughout the Sunnah. And he would joke with his companions as a means of joining their hearts together. Right? Having a light-hearted moment with each other, and doing this would increase their mutual love for one another. It didn't have to be serious all the time. There were moments in which the Prophet ﷺ would be relaxed and friendly with his companions. And so this particular approach to relationships and communal life, just like all of the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, all of his guidance, it should serve us as a teaching moment. That it doesn't always have to be serious and rigid. We don't have to always be, take ourselves too seriously, but we need to have moments in which we can be lighthearted and friendly. And so the hadith, it basically illustrates to us the gentle, very caring nature of the Prophet ﷺ in how he treated his companions. Of course, to look at some of those examples, as I mentioned to you, the author here mentions a few of them. He says, فَإِنَّهُ قَالَ لِرَجُلٍ, he said to a man, يَا ذَا الْأُذُنَيْنِ, Ya dhal udhunayn, which means, udhunayn is the 2 ears, right? Ya dhal udhunayn, which means, hey, 2 ears. Hey, 2 ears. And he said this to Anas ibn Malik. Anas ibn Malik, who was the very, very close companion who served the Prophet ﷺ from a young age. And he addressed him, Ya dhal udhunayn, in a joking way. I mean, it's not a lie because he has 2 ears, just like everybody else has 2 ears. But as some have said, that this was a way in which the Prophet ﷺ was encouraging Anas ibn Malik to listen to everything that the Prophet would say. If you understand that the relationship, Anas ibn Malik being young and admitting later on in life, he said, I served the Prophet for 10 years, but I was very young. And so, things happen you would expect from a young guy. And the Prophet ﷺ would order him to do things, and it would be what it was as a young man. So here he's making a lighthearted situation to say, yeah, that udhunayn, like, hey, look, listen up. You have 2 ears, meaning listen up to the instructions. There's another example he mentions here. He says to another man, "Inna hamiluka ala waladi naqa." And so this might not sound funny without the context. It says we're going to put you on the offspring of a she camel. And why that is a joke is because there was a man that came to the Prophet ﷺ asking for an animal to ride. Like he wanted to ride with them. And so the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, we're going to give you the offspring of a she camel. And what he thought was like a little baby camel that you can't ride. We're going to give you like a little baby camel to ride. And so he's like, well, I want to be included, and I want to go, and I want to have like a camel that I can ride. And he said to the Prophet, what am I going to do with the little baby camel? And the Prophet said, are not all camels born from the naqa? Meaning they're young or old, they all come from the she camel. Meaning we're going to give you the big camel. Don't worry, you're going to ride the big camel, buddy. Don't stress. And so it was a moment in which the Prophet ﷺ was joking around with his companions there, as you can see. It's still speaking the truth, even though there's this kind of way in which you can be truthful, but it's elusive. The truth is kind of elusive in a way. So you might think of the first thing that you think of is not what's intended by the person, and that's the next example. He says, وَقَالَ لِلْعَجُوزِ. He said to an elderly woman, he says, إِنَّهُ لَا يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ عَجُوزٌ. That the elderly do not enter paradise. The elderly, they do not enter paradise. And this story, the context of this story is that an older woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked that he make dua for her to enter into paradise. And that's when he said, hey, old people don't go to Jannah. And then he recited from the Quran, Surah Al-Waqi'ah. He recited, Inna ansha'nahunna insha'a. That we will bring them back or resurrect them anew. فَجَعَلْنَاهُنَّ أَبَكَارًا. And we will make them young again, basically. So, meaning that you won't go into Jannah as an elderly woman, but you will go into Jannah as a young woman. Okay, so again, being a bit lighthearted there with the elderly woman, though she was probably rather concerned or maybe even temporarily stressed on the idea. He, of course, relieved her, reciting from the Quran. And then another example of that is when the Prophet ﷺ said, زَوْجُكَ الَّذِي فِي عَيْنِهِ بَيَاضٌ. And this was your husband who has white in his eye. And this, in the context of this, is he was speaking to Ayman, and we know her very well as being one of the early servants of the Prophet's household was there during the Prophet's birth. Her name was Baraka al-Habashiyah. And the Prophet ﷺ, freed her and married her to Zayd ibn Haritha. And that's the husband, your husband who has the white in his eye. That's the husband he's talking about. She came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that her husband had invited him, had called upon him, if you will. And he said, Zawjuka, who's your husband? Zawjuka alladhi fi aynayhi bayad, meaning your husband, the one that has white in his eye. And she said, no, he doesn't have white in his eyes. And he said, yes, he has white in his eyes. And she said, Wallahi, he doesn't have white in his eyes. And he then responded and said, does not everyone have white in their eye? And so what she had understood, what this would typically be referring to is when you have some type of disease, like a cataracts or something, in which the dark pupil part becomes discolored or whitened or lightened, and not the outside white part around the pupil. So he, alayhi salatu wasalam, is referring to the white part of the eye and not the pupil. And she's thinking he's talking about my husband who has a problem with his vision, such that there's like some cataracts or something on the eye, that indicated his weak eyesight. And so she's, going back and forth, and he's playing with her a little bit, toying around, joking, trying to make light with her. So that was kind of, those are some examples. And there are other examples. There are other examples in which the Prophet ﷺ would joke or be playful. Many of us are familiar with some scenarios with his wife Aisha radiallahu anha. We all know the story of him racing her at one point in their marriage early on, and the Prophet ﷺ was beaten by her, and then later on he raced her again and he beat her. And he said, look, this was for that, meaning I beat you because you beat me. And then there was another scenario in which they went out to see the Habasha. They were doing like kind of a war dance with their weapons, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed her to come out and to watch that exhibition. That's what we could say. The exhibition that they were putting on for the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. And she stood behind him, and she kind of peered over his shoulder and watched the exhibition as they were doing their war dance. And so that was a moment in which the Prophet ﷺ was being lighthearted and being playful. So there are a number of important things to note here, as is mentioned by the author. He says that there are three things that you'll find in the Prophet's joking as a general rule, as kind of a foundation or a principle. Number one is, as I said, they're all truthful. He's not making up stories or fabricating things to get a laugh or to be lighthearted. That's number one. Number two is, it was typically done, the joking was typically done with women and children, or with men who needed some, they needed to be connected with, or they needed some ta'deeb, some type of correction. And the Prophet ﷺ would employ a joke as opposed to a stern word like ya dhal udhunayn, as opposed to a hey, listen to what I'm saying, instead of saying that ya dhal udhunayn, like hey, 2 ears, let's go. So you'll find that this was the way of the Prophet. So either with women, he needed to be lighthearted and to keep things easy, or with kids. That's another important thing for parents to remember. You need to have those lighthearted moments with your kids. And then, especially when they start to grow older, then of course you can utilize these types of jokes, etc., in order to get a message across without being overbearing. The third thing, and the last one, that is kind of a common thread between the jokes of the Prophet ﷺ is that they were rare. They weren't. So, like the examples that we have, you could count the examples that are reported in the Sunnah. You can count them. And those were over the span of his mission. It's like 20-some years. And you can count the times in which they would report these things, of course. So it wasn't that there's these volumes of jokes, right? Like a comedian's life work, where it's like one stand-up after the next. I've done like 10 Netflix specials as a comedian. It's like my life's work has been jokes. No, the Prophet ﷺ had, instead of 10 specials, he had like 10 jokes, something like that. So they were rare. And so it should be noted that one should not try and utilize those moments of joking as an evidence, as a proof to be a habitual jokester. Like the person is a comedian, and you go, hey man, it's getting a little excessive. And they go, well, the Prophet used to joke, so this is the sunnah. Like, wait a minute. No, the sunnah was that it was on the occasion. So it should be noted that the ruling for something that is rare is not the same ruling as something that is regular. And the example that I mentioned too about the Habasha, if someone were to go and spend their time watching those types of exhibitions, like day and night, they go out and watch those things, and then they go, because this is like a form of entertainment and play, and then they go, look, it's okay because the Prophet stood there with his wife Aisha radiallahu anha and allowed her to watch the Habasha as they did their exhibition, their war dance. So if someone were to try and employ those examples, which again, these are things which were rare, to try and justify something which is habitual, then they are incorrect. It is an invalid use of these prophetic examples. You cannot employ such an example to justify habitual things when in reality they were very, very rare in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So again, you have to think about excessiveness when it comes to joking, the types of jokes that are done, the habitual nature. Those are the types of jokes that are prohibited in our tradition. If you think about, if you would look at Ihya Ulumuddin, right, the great work of Imam al-Ghazali, which is what this is based on, he also notes an important kind of principle that you could apply to just about anything. And that is, there's a difference between a minor sin, which is done once or on the rare occasion, versus a minor sin which is done repeatedly. The minor sin that's done repeatedly becomes a major sin. And the same thing goes for a permissible deed that's done on the occasion. It's very different than a permissible deed that's done habitually, and that can lead to becoming a minor sin. So that has to be taken into consideration, and that's what our great scholars were concerned with. Also, he reiterates the point that it diminishes one's honor and respect. It can lead to ill will, and of course, those things should be avoided unless the joking is done in rare occasions or when appropriate, as was the manner of the Prophet ﷺ. And when it's done in that, and when it's done in that light, then it's like he says, "Inbisaltan wa tib an-nafs," which is kind of like to relax and to be lighthearted. So in that case, it's praiseworthy. So that's number 5, joking. Number 6 has to do with mockery and ridicule. Mockery and ridicule. So to begin, you can find this referenced in the Quran in Surah Al-Hujurat. This is chapter 49, verse number 11, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la yaskhar qawmun min qawmin asa an yakunu khayran minhum." And this means, O believers, do not let some ridicule others. And we're talking about the masculine here. So do not let some men ridicule others. They may be better than them. It says, وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِّنْهُنَّ. Nor let some women ridicule other women. for they may be better than them. Meaning the ones that are ridiculing the others, the ones that are being ridiculed are better than the ones that are doing the ridiculing. So this is mentioned in the Quran. And there are numerous explanations as to why this verse was revealed. And you could, if you were interested, you could look into the works of tafsir. I'm only going to mention one or two to keep it short. So one of the possible reasons why this verse was revealed is that there were a number of poor companions. Poor as in like financially poor. They were impoverished. Like Ammar, Khabbab, Bilal, Ibn Fuhayra, there was Suhaib, there was Salman. The likes of these companions, they were known to be of meager means. And the people of wealth, of money, they would make fun of them because they were poor. They were living in kind of impoverished conditions. Similar to what we might face today in a society that, values wealth and opulence. That you would make fun of somebody that is of lesser means. And the verse that I mentioned to you fits this exactly because they may be better than you. Right? And we're talking about some of the great companions. Ammar, we're talking about Bilal, Khabbab, Ibn Arab, Ibn Fuhayra. These great companions that had tremendous status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were being ridiculed for something that they probably didn't even care about. And the pious of the past, because of that, the pious, they would be very, very weary of ridiculing or mocking others. Because they were worried that they would be poking fun of someone that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored unknowingly. Right? You might see some poor person, some miskeen, some whatever, and it may be that they're honored there, they've been glorified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and raised in rank, and you're making fun of a person that Allah has exalted in status. They were also worried, the pious of the past were also worried that whatever they were laughing at or joking about, mockingly so at somebody, would end up happening to them. Essentially, meaning the table would be turned on them, and so they refrained from laughing and ridiculing people, understanding the principle of al-jaza' min jins al-amal, right? The reward or the outcome is typically the nature of the thing itself. So if you go around joking and ridiculing and mocking people, it's likely that you are going to be subject to the same thing as your recompense for doing such a thing. And so they would refrain for those. Those are two main reasons why you would refrain. Worried that this is somebody that Allah has honored, or look, I'm going to poke fun at this person because of whatever thing, and then I may be the subject of mockery and ridicule. Okay, so that's the first part of the verse when Allah is talking about the men. And women have been added to the verse because it also happens within their circles. So some men, they ridicule and mock at other people, and it also happens in the circles of women. As some have said that it may even occur at a greater frequency, that they may mock or ridicule. And there are examples of that within the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Even within his own household, there were situations in which one of his wives or more would mock or ridicule another wife, let alone the other women in the community. So you may note that some of the women at one point were poking fun at Salama. They were poking fun at her clothes in one narration, to the point that they were imitating her. Some have also mocked her height because she was short. It's also noted that Safiya bint Huyay was ridiculed by a co-wife. And they would call her Yahudiya bint Yahudi. Right? You understand what that means? While she was, of course, the wife of the Prophet and had become Muslim, and now they're basically calling her Yahudiya bint Yahudi. And she went to the Prophet ﷺ and told him about that. And the Prophet ﷺ turned to her and said, why didn't you tell them that my father is Harun and my uncle is Musa ﷺ, and my husband is Muhammad ﷺ? All right, so those were some examples in which this type of mockery occurred even during his lifetime and within the closest of his household and female companions. So this is mockery and ridicule. Mockery there. And so essentially what it is, you have a sukhriya and al-istihza. So sukhriya we might say is ridicule, and al-istihza is mockery. They're often used synonymously, one meaning the other, like as-sukhriya wa huwa al-istihza'u, be fulan or something like that, right? That you're going to make a mockery of someone to ridicule them. And what it basically means is that you're going to humiliate, you're going to disparage, you're going to try and draw attention or point out faults and flaws of that particular person in a manner which will have other people laugh and joke and mock at them. And this could be done by mimicking or imitating a person. Whether it's an action, you're imitating an action, or imitating and mimicking words that one might say. It can also be done. It can also be done with a gesture, like a head nod, or like a ishara bil yad, right? The gesture with the hand. You can mock and ridicule at somebody just by simple gestures, and all of these things are considered impermissible. So, something to note about the impermissible nature of this, because the companions, they were concerned with the smallest of infractions. There's a verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf. This is verse number 49. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَوُضِيَ الْكِتَابُ فَتَرَى الْمُجْرِمِينَ مُشْفِقِينَ مِمَّا فِيهِ. It says, and the record of deeds will be laid open. وَوُضِيَ الْكِتَابُ, the record of deeds will be laid open. فَتَرَى الْمُجْرِمِينَ مُشْفِقِينَ مِمَّا فِيهِ. And you will see that the wicked, the criminals, if you will, are in fear of what it contains. وَيَقُولُونَ يَا لَيْتَنَا مَا لِهَذَا الْكِتَابِ لَا يُغَادِرُ صَغِيرَةً وَلَا كَبِيرَةً. They said, woe to us. What kind of record is this? That it doesn't leave off any sin, neither the smallest of them nor the largest of them or the greatest of the sins. So even the smallest, لا يغادر الصغيرة ولا كبيرة إلا أحصاها, except that it has captured it. It has not gone unlisted. It has not gone unlisted. And so Ibn Abbas, great companion and scholar of the Quran, he said that the small sins being referred to in this verse include smiling in ridicule. And the major, to a believer, right? You're smiling at a believer in ridicule. And the major sin, he says, is when you laugh at them for it. They've done something, and you're mocking or ridiculing them just with a smile. He says that's the saghira, that's the small sin. And then if you were to laugh about it, then that would be the major sin. All of that's impermissible according to our legislation, and you can find that being prohibited in the Quran and in the Sunnah, some of that I've mentioned to you there. So in general, you should understand that it is impermissible to mock or ridicule anyone in any manner, and that is when you're trying to belittle or hurt them. Like if somebody is happy with you joking with them or joking about them, some may even enjoy that type of joking with them or about them. They might think that it's funny, it's fine, it's playful, it's like banter. Sometimes we might do that with each other, where they're really truly not hurt by it. Then that's a different story. Right? That's something altogether different. What we're talking about is a sukhriya wal istihza is something that's meant to harm. Here it's meant to belittle and to humiliate and disparage somebody. So this is what is impermissible, is this attempt to hurt somebody. And this includes laughing at someone for how they talk. When they talk, they might not have their words right. They might have made a mess of their ideas. So you laugh at them for making a mistake. They mispronounced something, and so you joke about what they said. Or if they were to trip and fall and you start laughing at them. Again, the person like is a lighthearted person and laughs as well and is not find that to be hurtful, that, hey, just think it's funny. And that's fine. Yeah, so there was I'll give you a personal story like this. It was the funniest thing in the world. So this is when we were in the Arabic Language Institute. So, we were the guys that were learning Arabic, so we're mispronouncing words quite often. So we have this guy with us in our class from France. He's a Moroccan guy, but born in France. So he's learning Arabic as a second language. And we're in the computer lab. They had this computer lab. It was funny because you only used it once a year. It was like one of those for the website computer labs. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we go into the computer lab, and we're all like in there for the first time. And we got the headsets on. And we're in those seats. They have the seats that you can rock back in. And so the brother he's a tall guy. He was like 6 foot. He probably, he was a big guy. Not like big, but, he was hefty. So he's in there, and he was like one of the nicest guys, top of the class, very friendly. He learned English through American rap music. Yeah, so he could speak English very well. But it was yo, Yeah. He was a great guy, and I've been in touch with him over the past couple of years. And so he's in there, and he's, if you were into the rap music, then you're going to lean back in the chair, you're going to get leaning back in there. And so this big guy's in the chair, and then all of a sudden the whole, boom, it's just like this loud echo of a crash. And I like take the headphones off, and I look over there, and he's like sprawled out on the floor, and he's just like, he's just looking at me, And he starts laughing about the situation, and he didn't move, which was the funniest part. He just sat there with the headphones still on, cords, about to pull the computer down. Yeah, so he wasn't bothered by it. So at that point, some of his friends, we were laughing with him. It's very different than somebody that they would get embarrassed. They would be embarrassed by those types of mishaps. And so you utilize the situation in order to cause harm and to hurt. So the context of the situation has to be considered, and then you have to be mindful of that. Those types of blunders, you have to consider who the person is. And err on the side of caution, especially if you don't know the person and their personality. So there you go. That's the two things we wanted to cover tonight. Number one was joking in excess, and then mockery and ridicule. And inshallah, the next time we get together for this particular chapter, we're going to be looking at another pitfall, which is divulging secrets, breaking promises, and lying when you've taken an oath, etc. And that's where we'll wrap it up for tonight. Jazakallah khair for attending. I appreciate it. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.